Hey guys, welcome to Amity Tracks, episode 2 of Jimi Hendrix Week, the second of 2 episodes. So we split the Jimi Hendrix videos into two. Well, the previous one, in case you missed it, was everything he kind of his main discography, everything he put out during his lifetime. His 3 studio records, the Band of Gypsies live album, the Smash Hits studio record, and drawing a blank. Anyway, that's mainly what we talked about. And so, that was the first episode. If you missed that, I would recommend checking that out if you're interested. This video is covering his posthumous discography, and this is a beautiful mess. I mean, to me, it's a fascinating story, kind of mystery to unravel, and, and you know, labyrinth to get through. Whatever analogy you want to use, because it's a confusing story. Uh, while he only released 3 studio records and a live album in his lifetime, we're dealing with 13 studio records here with his posthumous discography, plethora of live material, all kinds of comps. I mean, it's nuts. It's nuts. There's all kinds of legal issues involved and all of that. So what I'm going to try to do in this video is kind of unravel that for you and make sense of the story, and maybe show you, if you're interested, what you really need to get, from this era. And so Hendrix died September of 1970, and it was kind of a sudden surprise. When he died, he had been really deep into preparing his 4th record, and it was going to be a double. And so there was a lot of material that was in various stages of completion that he was getting ready for this, epic double record as his 4th record. It's kind of interesting because his 3rd record before had also been a double. He had music was just, kind of flowing out of him at this rapid rate. And the thing with Hendrix was obviously a genius, musical genius. Rarely, even when he was just screwing around and maybe jamming in the studio or whatever, rarely was it bad. I mean, it was always, his playing was always interesting. He always had these great ideas, even when he was just messing around. And he was a studio nut. He was a studio hound. And so he famously recorded everything, like every take of every song as it was kind of being worked through and all of that. So there are miles and miles of recordings and tape of Hendrix in the studio. And so due to this, when his untimely demise occurred, there's a lot of material there to kind of rummage through and put together a lot of records posthumously. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. And it's real exciting because he was also exciting, but also obviously very sad because what could have been, right? He was definitely in transition, moving into some different areas. He had started to experiment more with kind of this, to me, it's real fascinating hybrid of where he was going to take this. Rock, of course, still some psychedelic elements and all that, but bringing in way more kind of heavier blues and funk and R&B element and even jazz elements. And it was going to be this fascinating hybrid, and he was just starting to kind of work his way through all that, when he left us. I mean, real exciting stuff. He had discussed with Miles Davis working together, and can you imagine? We're talking like early 70s here. Miles Davis, was deep into his fusion stuff. So Miles of early 70s working with Jimi Hendrix. Man, what that could have been, right? Could have been, could have been. But we have what we have. And fortunately, he did leave us with a lot of stuff. So let's kind of unravel this. You can look at these. We're gonna look at these 13 kind of studio records first, and then we can talk about live stuff and comps, at least stuff that I have, because a lot of stuff out there that I don't have. But you can divide these 13 records into like 3 kind of segments. or eras, periods, whatever. So starting with this, like right after he died, there were four records that were put out kind of very quickly. They were assembled by Eddie Kramer, who was Hendrix's engineer for a lot of the time. Mitch Mitchell, Hendrix's drummer in the Experience, in both the original Experience and this sort of new version of the Experience that he was working with when he died, and Michael Jeffrey, who was a manager. And so basically, those three put this stuff together. And what the first posthumous release was Cry of Love. And what Eddie Kramer and Mitch Mitchell really wanted this to be was sort of, this is sort of what the fourth record was going to sound like, right? So it's a single record, and the fourth, of course, was Hendrix was thinking double. Now there were some tracks that they wanted to use that they couldn't because they had been set aside for what came next, which was what we call Rainbow Bridge. It's original motion picture soundtrack, but the music on this record really has nothing to do with what ended up in that film. It's mostly studio stuff and additional stuff, kind of the same material that Hendrix was prepping for that fourth album, kind of is spread out on these two, and then also a third one. So this is seen as sort of a trilogy, War Heroes, and so Cry of Love and Rainbow Bridge both came out 71. War Heroes came out in 72. And so very rapidly, you kind of have these three records, which are, like I said, really a trilogy, and I think are essential to own as a piece, as a set, because sprinkled amongst those three records are the tracks that we are pretty sure, most likely would have been on that fourth record. And then also some jams, some other stuff, to kind of fill them out, some B-sides and singles and that kind of thing. But the core of what was going to be on that fourth record are really kind of dispersed amongst these three records. And they're all three. I love listening to all three of these. I mean, again, that sort of hybrid, that rock and roll and soul and blues and funk, and I mean, you can hear that stuff, throughout these records. I mean, some highlights, coming off of Cry of Love: Freedom, Drifting, Easy Rider, and Nightbird Flying, and In From the Storm and Angel. Those six were probably the most complete, and pretty much were ready to go. And so those were pretty much going to be guaranteed to be on that fourth record. But My Friend, which is a great sort of Bob Dylan-esque kind of blues number, which was actually dating back to '68, which is fantastic. Straight Ahead is great. He was working on that. Astro Man, sort of his love of comic books, right? And then this is filled out with Belly Button Window, which it's a nice solo blues number there. And then off of Rainbow Bridge, you've got, say, Dolly Dagger, Earth Blues, and A Room Full of Mirrors, and Hey Baby, The Rising Sun, right? New Rising Sun. Those would be the ones that were most likely also going to be on the fourth. But this one's filled out with Polly Gap, which is just this funky jam. I love, love, love Polly Gap. That's on here too. Look Over Yonder, which is one that had been sort of worked out a while back, and kind of filled out with a long live Hear My Train a Comin', right, which is sort of a standard in his live sets for a long time. Then finally on War Heroes, Isabella, and Beginning, and Stepping Stone are the three that were most likely going to show up on that fourth record. And then some other great stuff. Bleeding Heart is fantastic. Highway Child, which now you can find on the expanded Are You Experienced, but it was a B-side, a little harder to find in 1972. So that was cool to have on here. Love those. The fourth in that grouping came out a little bit later, 1974. I do not have a copy of. Editor can throw a picture up here. It's called Loose Ends. And it was a UK and Japanese release only, and mostly that was filled with more kind of unfinished tracks and jams and stuff. Less likely that stuff would have kind of been worked out on that fourth record. But so you have those four. That period kind of ends, and then you have probably the most controversial period when this guy Alan Douglas, who had been a manager, got the rights to release posthumous Hendrix material. He put together two very controversial records that were released both in 1975, and actually I see them all the time. I've just never picked them up, but so editor can throw them up here. But there's Crash Landing, and then there's Midnight Lightning. They're so controversial because they're both filled with pretty much kind of unfinished songs, songs that were in sort of earlier stages of development when he died. And so Douglas hired session guys who had never worked with Hendrix, never, most of them never knew him personally, but hired these session musicians to come in and kind of fill out the tracks. And that's where, a lot of Hendrix purists, and even not so purists, cry foul, which I understand. It's one of the reasons you see them out, see them in used bins all the time. I saw them the other day actually, but I've just never wanted to grab them because of that. And I've listened to them, I've streamed them, but I just not something it really wasn't Hendrix's vision, obviously. 1980, Douglas put out, there's another one I don't have, Nine to the Universe, which was it's got a bunch of unfinished jams and such. And then 1995, Douglas put out Voodoo Soup. Show that as well. This was Douglas's attempt to assemble sort of a definitive version of that mythical fourth record, right? That was coming. Now, in the mid 90s, Jimi Hendrix's family regains control of his recorded legacy. And they put together a company called Experience Hendrix. And so from the mid 90s on to today, Jimi Hendrix's his estate, his family has direct control over the releases. And they've put out a whole series. The first thing they put out in 1997 was this, which is First Rays of the New Rising Sun, right here. Now this, I think more than anything else out there, is about as close as we're ever going to get to that fourth record. There's fantastic liner notes in here, a really long essay, really breaking down all the research they did. And these 17 songs that are on here are, as best as we can guess at this point, what that fourth record would have been. So I kind of agree. A lot of people say, and I agree with the sentiment, you can put this sort of right next to those three records of his that he put out during his lifetime and say this is basically the fourth record. It's about as close as we'll ever get to it. It sounds beautiful. I really need to get this on vinyl. I just haven't, but I've had it on CD forever. But Freedom, Isabella, Nightbird Flying, Angel, Room Full of Mirrors, Dolly Dagger, Easy Rider, Drifting, Beginning, Stepping Stone, My Friend, Straight Ahead, Hey Baby, New Rising Sun, Earth Blues, Astro Man, In From the Storm, and Belly Button Window. That's what they chose as the tracks. A great listen. I think this, I put this up with the first three records. Then in actually same year, that was 1997. They put, this is almost sort of a compendium or companion piece called South Saturn Delta, and this is sort of a lot of the some of this stuff maybe would have been developed and ended up on that fourth record too, but this is more sort of jams and less complete tracks and tracks that that had just been sort of little side things and then set aside by Hendrix. So this is, after First Rays, this is sort of seen as kind of mopping up the rest of the really worthwhile material, and it's awesome. Pally Gap, that song I told you I really like, that's on here. What else? Look Over Yonder. Some of the songs that he kind of worked with a little bit with Band of Gypsies in the studio, that had been on that Band of Gypsies live album. uh, some studio versions of some of those songs. And then like the Stars That Play with Laughing Sam's Dice, which is sort of an odd little B-side from a little while back. That's on here. This is kind of an odds and sods, sort of cleaning up the rest of the stuff. Bleeding Hearts, great. Drifter's Escape, another really good Dylan covers here. So yeah, there you go. Then there's a little gap. So those two both came out in 1997, and we don't hear anything again till 2010, and which supposedly is sort of what Experience Hendrix is still doing, is, I don't call it a vault clean out, but just sort of, archival releases is what they call them. And so in 2010, you had this, which is Valleys of Neptune. And the pattern I've noticed with the rest of these releases is they will uncover one pretty much complete kind of, holy grail type of thing that people want. Like the song Valleys of Neptune is on here. And then the rest of it will be, alternate takes and sort of, more vault clean out stuff. But they'll try and kind of pull you in here, with at least one track people have been wanting. But yeah, it's great. Like I said, I mean, almost everything he does is really good. So this is great. That same year, there was a 4 CD box set called West Coast Seattle Boy, which I don't have. Although I did buy a single CD sort of compilation of the compilation. So that's this. And again, it's just full of outtakes and alternate takes, and a lot of gems in there. What else? And then there's been two more, and two of which I don't have. I've streamed them and downloaded a few tracks back in the iTunes days. But there's People, Hell, and Angels from 2013, which again is just more outtakes and alternate takes and stuff like that. And then 2018, Both Sides of the Sky. And to date, that is all that has been put out, as far as studio stuff. Well, all right. I mean, it's a complicated web, to unravel. So very quickly, let me just kind of show you some live stuff I have. There is just a ton of live material out there. I do not have near all of it, but let me show you what I got. There's some compilations. Same deal. I don't have every comp, but So we'll start with live. I showed this already, but just to be complete on the live stuff, is his full set at Monterey, right? And then I have a CD version here of that as well. I guess a different angle of him burning the guitar than you usually say. But yeah, but it's both of them. Both of these feature the full set that he played at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. Really, his breakthrough in the United States. What else we got? This is kind of cool. His Winterland shows with the Experience from 1968 have been repackaged and re-released multiple times. This is not everything. This is only 7 tracks, but it's a nice kind of sampler of those legendary shows. So I've got that. We talked about Band of Gypsies in the first video. They did put out a Band of Gypsies 2, which is kind of interesting because side 1 is more tracks from those Fillmore shows that are on that Band of Gypsies album, and side 2 is filled out with some other tracks, from a little bit later, but that era still. So side 1 features the Hendrix, Cox, and Buddy Miles, and then side 2 is Hendrix, Cox, and Mitch Mitchell. So, but I like it. It's good. I've had this one forever. This is the Jimi Hendrix Concerts. It's a double album of just a lot of, live material. It's kind of funny. It's got the picture of the burning guitar from Monterey, but there's not any Monterey tracks on this double album. But put the picture there. The thing with a lot of these live albums is they do tend to recycle from a lot of the shows, So you've got, I don't know, this San Diego show from '69. I've seen that on a lot. There's some Winterland tracks on here. This Berkeley show from 1970. I've seen that pop up. There's a lot of tracks on here from that. And similar thing here. This was a soundtrack to a film called Jimi Hendrix. Same deal, double live album. of a bunch of live tracks, kind of from '68 and on mainly. Also features some interview clips from Hendrix. This little thing, I don't know this thing. This is like a little EP, I guess, 5 tracks. It's called Johnny Be Good. Interesting album art, right? Same stuff. That Berkeley show, the Atlanta Pop Festival, that stuff's been recycled a bit too. Let's see, on CD. I forgot I had this. I should have shown this when I did my Monterey versus Woodstock video, but I actually do own on CD Hendrix's Woodstock set, which is kind of an interesting transitional show. But and then I mentioned that Berkeley here is live at Berkeley. um, so this is the second show, so the late show from 1970. Here, it's the whole show. And then there's what happened to my shirt. Strange magic is afoot. All right. Then there's this, which is Blue Wild Angel Jimi Hendrix live at the Isle of Wight. Now, this was recorded, I believe, at the very end of August of 1970, so right before he died, because he died in September. And I don't know if this was his last show, but it's one of his last shows. I'm gonna be honest, it's not one of the best ones, but I guess it's important historically, really, for that reason. You got this. Now, this is awesome. Now, I love this. This is Jimi Hendrix Radio 1. So these are basically recordings from the BBC, right? And then if you're on CD, the BBC sessions, which is a lot more complete, a lot more tracks, but either one. A lot of you guys know, right? A lot of British bands, British artists. The Beatles and the Who. I'm trying to think of who else I have. Led Zeppelin. A lot of them, did these BBC sessions, right? And then they've been put out over the years. Now, of course, Jimi Hendrix is from the United States, but remember, Jimi Hendrix Experience really was put together in England. He broke first in England, so in a strange way, he was sort of part of that group of British bands who came to the United States, right? And so that's why he has a series like that. This is great stuff, man. Driving South kicks ass. It's so good. It's so good. Finally, looking at now, there's a billion compilations out there. I just want to show really these were essential to me, and it is the essential Jimi Hendrix and the essential Jimi Hendrix Volume 2. Now, Volume 1 is a double. Volume 2 is a single. Plus, there's kind of this fun little 7-inch in there of him doing Gloria, the old Van Morrison song. But these I think these came out in let's see, this was 78, 79. For a lot of, at least for me, this was really, I think, when I really started to dive into Hendrix was with these two collections. They're pretty awesome. And what's cool is they do include, at least volume 1 includes pretty much a whole side and part of another side of that posthumous stuff. So it really is pretty complete. And then you add this, and yeah, I don't know, I guess kind of like Hot Rocks was for the Stones, right? Or the Red and Blue albums for the Beatles. For a lot of people, this got people into Hendrix. At least that was the case for me. I have this interesting, just cool album art, right? It's kind of random. When did it come out? 82, 84, yeah. Just one of a billion, Hendrix comps out there that you can get. But I have that. Whew, all right, it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. So wrapping up here, out of all that posthumous stuff, what do you need? I mean, if you just want to cut to the chase, I would get this is available on vinyl. So yeah, get this on vinyl, and then get South Saturn Delta to kind of follow up. I think this is the the essential of the posthumous stuff. If you want to go old school and you kind of like having these older releases, these are pretty easy to find. This they've actually started. They've reissued. So this is a reissue. These two, I think you got to find kind of older copies out in the wild, but they're not hard to find. There are a lot of them. So anyway, go with these or go, more of a one stop here, and then you can fill it out with that. Well, all right, guys. Thanks for watching. I find that very interesting, unraveling the whole posthumous story. Anyway, in the comments, let loose. So what do you guys think? What do you guys, what are your favorites of all of these choices? The stuff that was released after his demise. Please do subscribe to the channel. We appreciate it. And hit the bell for notifications, like the videos, all that stuff really helps us out. And we'll see you next time.